do have, and I got.
Just watch this screen and
walk down there.
if it pops up and says someone wants to
Catch it?
or admit. Got it.
Clear. Just turn it off.
Set that on there. Hopefully it'll pick everything up.
Well, now that it's time to get started. We're missing Mr. Cullimore.
Yeah.
Kind of the reason we're here.
Maybe the car. He said he's really close. He left not too long ago, but. I wonder if I should go look for him so he's not wandering the building. Did he know basement?
I don't know if he knows this building at all.
I told him where it was at.
He's been in here before.
Has he?
Yeah.
For the planning.
Now, planning commission was in the other building.
That was in Deseret Peak.
Yeah, he called me over an hour ago, said he was leaving to come out.
Force everybody to you. Does farm diesel go up with the regular pricing, like when you do number 2 and just so you the farm?
Stays about 40 cents behind.
40 cents behind because all the taxes.
Yeah, that's the only difference. It takes taxes off.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, you're right here in the middle.
Yeah.
They expect you to climb under. They want you over there.
How are you?
Good, how are you doing?
We got this wall. All right. Got everybody?
Except the recorder.
Recorder. Well, we'll do that later.
Got it.
We've got a recorder. All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is a meeting between the Erda City Council and Ochre Point Development, LLC. Today is Wednesday, March 16th, 2022 at approximately 3:00 p.m. This meeting is held at the Tooele County Auditorium located at 47 South Main Street, Tooele, Utah. We'll start off with a roll call and just to get our city council member in line, then after that we'll go around and get everybody else. Scott Dubay
Is here.
Craig Smith.
Here.
Jess Bird is here. Terry Miner.
Here.
Kel Martin.
Here.
Let's go ahead and do a pledge and then we'll get
We
started.
wish you also in attendance. Everyone else here.
All right. So we've got our city council members alongside me, and then I'll just go down around the table starting here.
Jordan Cullimore, State Ombudsman's Office.
Jordan.
Joe Colosimo, Ochre Point.
Joe White, Ochre Point.
Gerald Anderson, Ochre Point.
Tom Checketts, counsel for the developers.
Scott Sarek, Ochre Point.
John Bram, city attorney.
Thank you, everybody. And going with our tradition here, we'll go ahead and do a pledge. And Dale, I think I'll ask you to.
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. Now I'm going to turn the time over to John Brems, our city attorney. He's going to get us started.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of lay the foundation. And maybe it's an opportunity to push reset or restart to see where we are. I don't want to be rude, but at 4:30 I have to leave, whether we're done or not. So it's just a hard point for me. We've asked Jordan to join us, and he's kind of concerned exactly what it's going to be, whether it's going to be a mediation or he's going to act as an arbitrator or what. But I think we'll just go and see what happens. So to set the stage, I thought it might make sense to go through some of the factual background of where we are and why we're here, and issues that I think we should discuss here, and maybe issues that Jordan can't help us with, if that's all right. So in November 2021, Ochre Point and Tooele County entered into a development agreement. Then on January 3rd, 2022, the development agreement was recorded. On that same day, the Lieutenant Governor issued Erda's Certificate of Incorporation. And then the thing that has brought this to a head, by letter dated March 1, Ochre Point has asked Erda for an estoppel certificate. And the development agreement contains language that the county will give an estoppel certificate. I don't want to get argumentative, but the estoppel certificate request is probably a little broader than it says in the development agreement itself. And I think to zero in on the point is there's some statutory interpretation or some requirements. And so 109A 5091D says that a subsequent incorporation of a municipality does not affect a land use application approved by a county in accordance with 1727-508. So that's the law we have to live with. But then we have to look at 1727-508 to see what it says. And it's basically your vesting type statute. It says an application isn't, and I'm just reading parts of this, and there may be parts that are left out, not intentionally to preface anything, but it says an application is entitled to approval of a land use application if the application conforms to the requirements of the applicable land use regulations, land use decisions, and development standards in effect when the applicant submits a complete application and pays the applicable fee. And then there's a couple exceptions if there's a compelling or countervailing public interest, or first in time, basically. So I think the issue is to look at is what is the development agreement entitle them to, and is it applicable to Erda? And I've been trying to make a distinction between the land use components that are probably subject to this statutory interpretation and the contractual obligations that are not necessarily, that rise to the level of a land use component that is triggered by this statute. Then I can go through those if you want. More recently, we've received a referendum on Ordinance 2210. And that ordinance adopted the PC zone and the zoning map as applicable to this property. The development, how that applies, I don't know. Hopefully Jordan can give us some real light on it. And then we probably got into more discussions on issues beyond that, which I don't think we really ought to. I don't know if Jordan can help us with them, but what Erda has asked is some modifications to the agreement. And that's probably where the most angst and discussion has come, and I don't know if Jordan can help us with that one. We've asked for these changes. Some of them you said yes to, some of them you said no to, and maybe at the end of the day, you say, here's where we are, and city, what do you want to do? Instead of just discussing it back and forth and let them make a decision.
This is where I jump in.
This is where you jump in, Jordan.
I don't know, should we do you have anything to add to that?
Let me add just a couple. I think that's a good summary. I think that's an even-handed, good summary, and thank you, John, for providing that. A couple of additional points. One is when this property was rezoned prior to the development agreement, so to just take one step further back, there was a referendum attempt that failed in the county. And so this zoning that we believe is vested in the development agreement was subject to all the public meetings that one would expect through the county process, and then also it went through the referendum thing. So that's one point. Another point, just to get the interplay between maybe the current referendum that's in place with the city's PC zone that there was a referendum on, is that the development agreement vests in the PC zone that was in place for the county. So I don't know if that makes a distinction for you, but for me, what that says is we think that we are separate and distinct from whatever subsequent zoning happens on the property, or whatever happens with the referendum of the city's PC zone, because the development agreement even attaches as an exhibit the county PC zone that was in place at the time. So with those two kind of clarifications, one I guess maybe was more argumentative than I meant to be.
The second one was more.
Yeah, and I apologize for that, but just to give the background, I think that's kind of where I think we're at right now.
Well, first of all, again, my name is Jordan. I'm with the Ombudsman's Office. Thanks for having me. Just so everyone knows, my job typically isn't to take sides. Even when we do advisory opinions, our goal isn't to take sides. It's to help the parties predict what a court would say, and then to be able to resolve their dispute in light of that opinion. So in that regard, I should also say, I don't represent anyone. I'm not anyone's attorney. Largely, I find these situations are best when I answer questions that I'm asked and don't provide information that you don't want, frankly. So I was invited by the city council to come and provide training, answer questions. So in that light, council members, anyone else who's interested, if you have, what would you like me to speak to, if that makes sense? Or how can I be helpful in this scenario?
Well, I think I could probably help zero in.
Okay.
And I think I've asked this question a few times. Do they have vested rights, and what are those vested rights?
Okay. Yeah, and so I've talked about this with you. I've talked about this with the developers again. Since we're a neutral third party, we try to be impartial, and we try to give our understanding of things. And the best way I can frame it, again, I haven't read the agreement in detail, so I'm speaking generally. But when we're talking about development agreements, and in our office's experience, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's a duck. So if it operates like a zoning ordinance, the development agreement specifically, if we're talking about doing things the zoning ordinances do, establishing permitted uses, setting densities, height and setback requirements, all of those things that regulate the use of land, then those things are going to be vested once they come in, once the development agreement is entered into. And then, in conversations I've had with you and with Tom and Joe and Daryl, I get that there might be aspects of the agreement that don't look like a zoning ordinance or operate like a zoning ordinance. They don't walk like a duck, they don't talk like a duck. And so they're probably contract provisions. And those are things that, yeah, you're gonna hopefully be able to work out through negotiation and those types of things. But as the law operates and as I understand it, and I get that this is a unique circumstance, we don't have any precedent to really guide what happens specifically when the county makes a decision on a development agreement and then the city steps into the place of the county for that development agreement. To what extent are they obligated under that development agreement? To what extent are they not? And again, to the extent that it operates as a zoning ordinance for the property, based upon the provisions you cited to, my understanding is that that becomes, you obtain a vested right in those aspects of the agreement.
What about if there's two permits for the same property?
Two permits for the same property, so explain that a little more.
So like, they originally put in, what is it called, the KTM or something like that, for a development agreement or whatever, and supposedly that was a done deal or whatever, so then they came back in with an Ochre Point, and they're doing both at the same time.
Okay.
Because I got a thing from the county or whatever says, well, it'll be KTM, unless we agree with the Ochre Point, then KTM falls off. And there was like 2 or 3 that stated that, said it's KTM, unless you agree with the Ochre Point, then the KTM falls off. So I don't understand how both of them can be swimming the same stream.
So does anyone have any context for that? What's going on there?
Yeah, when we can.
Sure.
You want me to?
If that's okay, you get your.
Of course.
Yeah.
Under before the Ochre Point zone change, under the current zoning of the property.
Previous zoning.
Well, I mean, we're pre-Erda City, pre-Ochre Point. Ochre Point is going through its process right now. It hadn't been decided on. The land zoning at the time of the property had probably, correct me if I'm wrong, 80 acres of commercial highway. And
So this is when it was in the county.
this is when it was in the county.
And the applicant was KTM.
The applicant was me.
Okay.
Under
Through
KTM.
KTM.
And it's just another application, but it wasn't really an application for zone change. It was a permitted use already allowed by county
So
code.
you're doing an administrative.
So we just put in an
subdivision or
application.
Site plan or something.
We put in an application for an apartment hotel, which was identified in the county code as a permitted use.
Okay.
And what that did is it put density, but it limited the density to those 80 acres. But it was pretty, it was pretty dense. So in the meantime, and that was a permitted use in the county. So our feeling is we liked Ochre Point better. We still want to use our property. So when we put, we just said, we put in the application, we had our reviews, met with the county, and the county said, we'd rather have Ochre Point than KTM.
Okay.
We said, okay, whatever you choose. And they approved Ochre Point.
So then you started the concurrent,
So then we just dropped KTM.
or you just dropped it.
So KTM,
I would say is Robbie just.
But you didn't formally rescind it.
yeah, we didn't formally rescind
Kind of
it.
set it aside and then
Set
you
it
started a new track.
Well, then they just approved Ochre
Just
Point.
don't do this.
They approved
Yeah.
Ochre Point
So-
with this development.
And maybe I could characterize it this way. They went in and got something that they were fully entitled to with the
Yeah.
current zoning.
Okay.
And that was an administrative decision, it wasn't subject to referendum, they could have plowed ahead. The county said, we'd really like something different there. If you'll go down this path with the PC zone and work with us to design something that's gonna be a quote unquote better, and that's very subjective, right? But a better development, then staff will recommend it and we'll see what happens. The concern with that is we're going with something, from something that was certain to something that was requiring legislative body approval, was subject to referendum. And so there was this desire not to rescind KTM, but to leave it there as the fallback in case the rezone didn't happen or if there was a referendum, so that those vested rights, if you will, in KTM weren't gone. And so, that gives you the background, then we
Yeah.
can let you answer the question.
Is there any other background or context anyone would like to clarify? Yeah. So, I mean, to answer your question with that context, to me, that's not an unusual process for a developer to go through to try different options. And yeah, to me, you just treat the application separately, you know? And so if one was an administrative application for, development of a by right approval, then, you know, if they comply with all the requirements, they're entitled to approval. And to the extent that they didn't let their application lapse or expire, then, you know, they can continue to do that. But if it did lapse or expire, then they have to start over with whatever the new and current zoning is. And then, yeah, to pursue the second route of getting zoning, you treat that separately, and you have different decision-making processes you go through there, you know. Does that answer your question? You don't look very convinced. So that's not an unheard of process. I mean, that's something I've heard of developers doing before. You know, they'll lock in what they know is gonna be vested, and then they'll maybe pursue another route to see if they can get some vested rights over here, recognizing that there's gonna be some discretionary decisions before they get to the vested aspects.
So that was all through the county, so what you're saying also, so if the county agreed to pay $500,000 for a road, then by default, the city has to pay that as well?
So see, that's the aspect, right, in the conversations I've had where I think there's a really good question and a good argument to make that those are contractual provisions as opposed, you don't find that in a zoning ordinance. And so, you know, to say you are vested in that provision, I think there's a really good argument to make that no, that's more of a contract provision that needs to be negotiated out and figured out if you have two parties that now, if we're assuming that the two parties that we're dealing with now aren't bound by that agreement.
Now, if there's several plots involved, and say only
The
one.
contractual part, but yeah, sorry.
If there's several plots involved and only one, say pretend, meets the vested point, does all the other plots grandfather into that, or does that mean just that plot is the only one that's vested?
You're vested in whatever was applied for is the best answer I can give there. So
Doesn't it have to deal with paid fees and stuff, so if you haven't paid for the other ones, then they therefore would not be vested?
arguably, yeah, and we do advisory opinions on that kind of thing. What did we vest in, especially with phased developments? For instance, if the development agreement contemplates all of those phases and gives approvals for all those phases, they're probably vested in all the phases. But if the development agreement doesn't contemplate them, or maybe specifically says, hey, you gotta come back for additional approvals, you know, that kind of evidence it weighs in favor of a finding that no, they're not, you know.
Let me just highlight that. So I think what Terry's trying to get at is vested in what? And so I'm looking at the PC zone, and there's like 4 or 5 stages that you go through for approval. And the first one is a PC zone and plan. And that requires planning commission and county commission approval. It probably did that. I don't think I could argue against that. And it also contemplates a community structure plan. I don't know if you guys applied for that yet and paid your fee for that. It also then talks about a project plan subdivision plat. I don't know if you applied for that and then paid for that. Because I think you gotta apply and pay. Those are the 2 key ingredients for the vesting. And then the last component is a site plan approval. You have to apply for that and pay for that. And you have to meet the requirements that's in the ordinance. And so I'm concerned that maybe those last 3 haven't been vested, so to speak. And then I also wanted to address that even if you are vested, it can be stopped by a compelling countervailing public interest.
You want my thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
I mean, yeah, so the way we always look at those where you have a multi-stage approval process, if you've started the process, I think it would go against the concept of vesting for a city to design their ordinance in a way that they have multiple vesting events that essentially destroy the concept of vesting, to say that, because the whole idea behind vesting is once the developer comes along and says, here's what we're planning to do, the city can't pull the rug out from underneath them. They can't change the rules midstream, and the court says. So if there's a process laid out, then when you come in and start that process and pay the fee and submit the application to start the process, even when there's multiple stages, then you don't vest and say, yeah, you're approved and everything, because you haven't made sure that they comply with everything yet. But usually the way we read that under Western land equities and those types of things is to say, once they've started the process, then it locks in the ordinance. And that's the rules that govern the process. And so, yeah, they still need to come in and get the community structure, the 2, 3, and 4. But as far as the rules that apply to their approvals for the 2, 3, and 4, it's gonna be the same rules that apply to 1. That, again, I'm speaking really high level.
But the fuzzy part is that was all through the county, is what you're saying. And
Yeah.
now the city is assuming that debt. See, when it was
Yeah.
first started, I says, the county's writing the checks, but the city's gonna have to cash.
Okay.
So it's a little different than a normal, developer, get with the city, let's come out with something. It's like, here's our plan we had, now you are forced to live it.
Yeah, and that point is well taken, for sure, so.
So, John, to answer your being in the PC zone in Tooele County prior to, so it has all those things, levels that you talk about. So 31.8 being the community structure plan, but 31.8.2 says, subject to conditions or limitations agreed to in the development agreement, the development agreement based on the approved PC zone plan shall confer a vested right to proceed with development process established in the chapter for property, including, within the applicable PC zone plan, the number of dwelling units and the square footage of non-residential uses reflected in the approved PC zone plan. Upon approval of the PC zone plan, which was approved with the development agreement, this should constitute an amendment to the Tooele County General Plan for the area covered by the PC zone plan. And then the next chapter is the structure plan. So it's doing exactly what Jordan said. It's vesting the right. Now real money is gonna go get spent on the rest of it. And so it contemplates, the PC zone contemplates that question, when does that vesting occur? And it occurs upon the approval of the master development agreement.
For what it's worth, again, that's a typical process to say, okay, we've locked in the rules and now you still have to go through the process and make sure you get all the approvals before you're.
Maybe I could speak to the ordinance 10-9A-509. This is the ordinance that says when property is incorporated, that the city takes it with whatever's vested. My way of thinking of this, and this might help and it might not, and John will tell you after I leave whether I'm crazy or not. But I think of it this way, if a piece of property has a landlord and a tenant, the owner of the property has entered into a lease, and then I come and buy that property, I buy it subject to that lease. And so I might not like the term of the lease, or I might wish that the rent was higher, or that the use, the permitted use in the lease is different. But if I buy that property, I know that I'm gonna buy it subject to the lease. And what I see 5091D doing is saying that same thing. It's sort of like saying, okay, city, if you're going to choose to incorporate this land, it's kind of like you're buying it. And you kind of buy it with what's in place for that property. And here it's not a lease, it's a development agreement. But that's just kind of my way of thinking of it. And I can appreciate a new city coming in and saying, hey, we're a new city, we want to be a blank slate. But I know when I've purchased property and they've had leases on it, I may really want that. But the fact of the matter is, if I bought something that has a lease on it, that has it in place, I take it subject to it. So I don't know if that's a helpful analogy.
But there also could be a lien on that property, and you gotta clear the liens too. So if it's a clear one, yeah, but there could be like a lien on it that you'd have to, on that same property.
Yeah, and let me, that's true, and let me maybe address, you brought up a scenario of a road. In 5.7 of the development agreement, the county had a memorandum of understanding where the county had some obligations to do some things with State Road 36 and the 33rd Parkway. And what the development agreement did is it took those obligations that the county had agreed to step up to, and the master developer took all those obligations and put them on their side of the ledger. And so as you read 5.7.1, that's what it's trying to say. So it's not saying that the city has stepped in and now has obligations. It's just the opposite. It's saying that there was a prior agreement called the Memorandum of Understanding number 10-08-04. And the developer is taking those obligations off of the shoulders of the government and saying that they'll bear that burden.
So you modified the plan.
We modified an agreement. It's like when we showed up, there was a lease in place. And we agreed to take on the obligations of that lease. So that when this property comes into Erda City, that obligation is on the developers, not on the city. And so I know there's been some confusion about, hey, are we, i.e. Erda City, is Erda City having foisted upon them this obligation to expend big money on a road and an intersection? I say, no, it's just the opposite. There was an obligation in place. The developer took on that obligation. And that's what 5.7.1 is trying to say.
So let me, I think that's a okay example, but I don't think it's really relevant, because when you buy property, you decide you're gonna buy it. These guys have been trying to incorporate for years. And once it's established, the boundaries, it's locked. You can't change it. And they can't go back and say, oh, well, we want that piece out there because it's got a lease on it. So I think it's helpful, but not.
It's not a perfect example.
Yeah, it's not a perfect example.
But they surely can. I mean, they can decide today to say, we'll disconnect you and let you out. We don't want the lease. Here you go. Have it back to
Have
account.
the property back.
Yeah, they could say that, but that's their legislative decision if they want
Correct.
to do that.
Sure.
So the other point, I wanted to make in response, well, actually I want to make two. One in response to you. I would probably agree that things like residential units, density, square footage, are probably vested. I'm not so sure I would agree that the location of major highways, infrastructure, open space is vested, because you got to go through another application, and I think you have to pay another fee, and so I don't know if that's vested, and so maybe I'm pushing back a little bit on Jordan there. But even if you're vested, it can be stopped by a compelling countervailing public interest. And we have a referendum here that might be a compelling countervailing public interest.
I mean, so that language, the courts really haven't told us what it means, you know? And all I can say there is, the industry, everyone does agree. So we're talking about, okay, what does everyone agree that it is, and where are there still questions, is how I look at it. And everyone agrees that you can defeat vested rights, or you can eliminate vested rights when there is a significant public health or safety concern. The typical example that I hear is someone gets a building permit, and then the house next door the next day starts sliding down the hill. Then, you know, the city can come back and tell the person who just got their permit, you know what, we're pulling this permit because clearly there's something wrong up here from a geological standpoint. And so we're gonna take away your vested rights to build a home because there's a compelling countervailing public interest. This land might not be safe. You know, whether or not what you described constitutes a compelling countervailing public interest, I don't know. I mean, again, I think it's outside of what the industry typically contemplated that provision to mean. That's not to say you don't find a court that agrees with you eventually.
Well, Sandy City's case said that the referendum right trumps vested rights. Sandy City.
This has been referendumed already.
By the county, not the city.
Yeah, I couldn't speak intelligently to that one, to be honest. So, yeah, I don't know that I'll be helpful.
Yeah, so I think what the court said in that case is that the public's right to vote is established in the Constitution, and that trumps a vested right.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't read that one, I have to go look at it.
So why would there be double jeopardy?
That's not double jeopardy.
What would it be?
So double jeopardy is a criminal law constitutional concept.
Yeah, I get, it's just a similar premise.
But it's a similar concept, but unfortunately, you can be sued civilly over and over for the same thing. So,
And so is the situation you're describing where, okay, someone gets they get the zoning, and then maybe they get a concurrent administrative approval. And then, but the legislative decision is referred to the people. And so then you go down the path of getting it referred, and during that time, any sort of administrative approval that was granted it's like the pending ordinance rule essentially, in my mind, where until that referendum is decided, the developer proceeds at their own risk on the administrative approval. Is that the scenario we're describing here?
Well, on the legislative, what happens from the legislative point of view, because there's, the PC zone was legislative, and
Yeah.
zoning this property was legislative.
So, I mean, yeah, if we're talking about that period within which the city council makes their, or I guess the county council in this situation, made their decision up until the point at which the voters decide, there are no vested rights if they also got a concurrent administrative approval subsequent to the now referred legislative decision. But then once the voters vote, then whatever the outcome is there after that, you should know if there are vested rights or not. And if it's referred and then they confirm what the city council decided, then they're vested,
So let me clarify what I think the question is, or the position is. So with the county, there was a rezone, there was a referendum attempt that failed.
Okay.
Then there was an application.
Okay.
Then there's an incorporation in the city, and so that the city would have a holding zone. They adopted a similar, but not the same, PC zone.
Hmm.
That subsequent post-incorporation zone is the subject of a referendum.
Okay.
Does that change your analysis?
So, I mean, if that's a good one, man, I need to write this down. So there was,
Welcome to Erda.
yeah. So there was the county decision, referendum failed, administrative decision. To me, that one vests in whatever was here,
Okay.
regardless of what went on back here, is maybe the simplest way to put it. Is what I'm seeing.
So let
And
me
I'm
say
speaking
what I
real
think.
high level,
Let me
right?
say what I think you said. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, I'm just trying to
Yeah,
understand.
please.
I think you're saying that you would think under that scenario, the developer's vested and that the subsequent rezone that was referendum doesn't affect the prior vesting. Is that what you said?
Again, under the provision that says any applications or approvals granted under the county carry over to the city, then yeah, whenever that referendum failed and the zoning became hard, I guess you'd say, concrete, then any applications that came in after that, valid land use applications that were complete and the fee was paid, would vest in whatever the rules were when they applied. And then those rules would continue to apply until that development was approved, irrespective of the incorporation and subsequent zone changes. That's how I see it.
What about the new referendum? I think I still don't understand. What happens?
Yeah, so I mean, if the city incorporates and then they put in place a zoning ordinance, and then that one is referred, so now we're in that time period, then any applications that came in from the time that zoning ordinance was put in place, so if someone else theoretically brought in an application the next day, but then, within the 7 days it was referred, then that individual would be put on notice that, hey, until we vote on this decision, your application is pending and may be subject to whatever decision is made here. But to me, again, I see that as, and take it for what it's worth, but I see that as being outside of what happened over here. Because everyone can see what I'm looking at here, right?
So how many county, city, like we're going through here, have you dealt with in the past?
that have done what you guys are doing right now. This is it, this is the first. Yeah, we're in
So a lot of
theoretical.
this is kind of make-believe.
Isn't that what lawyers do? Everything we
Well,
do is make
if they all agreed, then we wouldn't need judges, right?
That's right. Yeah, this to me is, it's a great law school question for the students.
Jordan, I don't know if it makes, if we get too detailed, but on that topic, there's even more complication because the PC zone that was approved with this development agreement isn't a mirror image of what's being referendum. And so if we wanna go down this route, then you really get messy because now you'll have, they don't match 100%.
Yeah.
And so that really complicates it. And
I
then
think they
even,
do, don't they?
you know, and then even 20,
There's changes in definitions.
no, in the ground that was rezoned. And then even giving further afield,
So like the boundaries you're saying are different? Okay.
and then there's even, you know, questions on how 2210 was even handled.
That's, you're talking about their ordinance.
I'm not saying the referendum on the PC zone, chapter 31 is applicable here. But you're saying that they're different. And I would just make the point that we adopted by reference chapter 31. How could they be any
No,
different?
chapter 31 is the same. Absolutely. Chapter 31 is the same.
I misspoke. I was under the understanding that there had been some change to some definition. I was just wrong.
Chapter
So I
31,
apologize.
you adopted.
So-
Was the area that was zoned is different, so that area that was zoned is
Well,
different, ought to be
boundaries be a
subject
little
to
different.
the referendum.
Irregardless, it's way after the,
The best.
I mean, anything that Erda City has done since. You know,
I just
it's
want to
not
make clear
There are,
that there is a referendum in place, a wholesale
There's a
on
referendum
chapter
against
31.
2210.
yeah, and that's fine.
This development agreement has, you know, is not subject or not gaining any vesting from 2210. It was gained vesting in Tooele County in chapter 31.
So,
Well, if we're talking referendum, let's go back to 2020, the same area was proposed and referendum and put on the ballot, it's like put down like by 80% of the voters. Then they renamed it and called it something else and redeveloped. State changed a lot.
So if I can, if you're okay, I mean, what is difficult about these scenarios? Typically when I do mediations, and I'm not saying we're getting into that stage of things, but you know, representatives are designated so that we can get around the table and hash something out. And then, you know, the representatives can then take it to the decision makers. I've even done mediations where, you know, we're talking about a water company in the city and there's representatives and the water company has to take it back to their board and the city representatives have to take it back to their city council. So that's not unusual. But it's easier to make decisions when there's people that the two sides trust, working out an agreement tentatively that they can then take to the sides and hash out. Is that something you guys are interested in doing today, is trying to discuss terms? Because the alternative is you go to court and you let the court hash it all out. And again, maybe I'm asking this question prematurely, but is there interest in doing that today and sitting down and trying to see, okay, can we identify what we agree on, what we don't, and then working through the things we don't? Or is that an appropriate question at this point in time?
it is from our side.
What say you guys?
We don't have time to do something like that today,
Okay.
but I'd be in favor of it.
Okay, and for what it's worth, I'm happy to facilitate that process. Again, if the city council is interested in designating a few people, again, they're not gonna make a decision that's gonna be binding. They're gonna try to work out a proposed agreement that they can then take to the council in an open meeting like this and say, okay, here's what we talked about, here's the agreement we reached. Do we wanna move forward based upon that agreement? To me, that's the process that we can provide, and that's what I've seen as a way forward if the parties are interested in trying to resolve this without judicial intervention, so.
I do think it's important to talk about Shoshone, because we're trying to make the case for compelling countervailing public interest. This was a successful referendum, and KTM and Ochre Point came shortly thereafter. I don't have dates to give to you. And I don't know much about Shoshone, but I know that it was similar in.
It's a 6 Mile Ranch or is that
No,
separate?
no, do you want me to give you some context? Is that okay, Jess?
Please, Joe.
So 2018, Shoshone Village, got approval for 173 third-acre lots and some commercial up front. It was referendumed.
And is this within now Erda city limits?
This is now within Erda City,
Well,
so it was
yeah.
all county at the time.
And it was about on 130 acres of
So
350
it's only,
that's Oker
it's
Point.
only on a portion
portion of it.
of what was Oker Point.
So this never came to be, but it was on a smaller portion of what is now the Oker Point proposal.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
So-
What was the density again?
173 lots. It was 173 1-acre lots. And I can't remember exactly. Third-acre lots, yeah, not 1-acre lots. Third-acre lots. So it gets referendumed, and across the street, another piece gets referendum that has the same zoning. And so what the law states, or what it allows, and what it clearly allows now, is when a property is referendumed, and if the referendum gets enough signatures to be successful, the landowner has 7 days to withdraw that land. All they do is withdraw the complete
The
application.
proposal, which is now in statute, frankly,
Yeah,
right?
it is, and it
Yeah.
was inferred, but now it's in statute. Well, now, the property on the west, we took we rescinded our application, which returned the zoning to the way it was prior to the legislative decision. Shoshone Village owners decided that the developer, it wasn't us, but their developer decided to go to the vote. Didn't see what the public said. So that vote, the legislation was turned down, or the referendum was successful, and therefore the zoning just goes away.
Yeah.
But here's the error in the application of that referendum. The error is you're assuming that that vote controls in perpetuity, and it doesn't. It controls just that application. The
Well,
land,
and it controls that zoning decision.
that zoning decision
Yeah.
only.
Yeah.
But just because the referendum is voted down, doesn't mean that you get to stamp that piece of parcel inusable, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just goes back to the normal zoning. So
No, that is
now,
true, and we have to have the conversation of if the city makes a decision, council, and then the voters refer it and they go through the process and they overturn the decision. Again, since the council's authority and the voters' authority is co-equal, the very next day, the council could convene a meeting and say, we're rezoning it back. If they do that, they probably won't get voted in again, right? But yes, because of that and their co-equal authority, that's possible.
well,
Is that kind of
that's exactly, and it's no different than what Erda City did. Erda City did an ordinance that covered all of it. A few people got together and got to them and said, we don't want this, but we want this. And so Erda City, the next meeting, says, oh, we're gonna take that ordinance away. And we're gonna adopt 2 ordinances, because everyone's okay with this one, but a few people don't like this one. So what we're doing in property rights is exactly what Erda City did, is they went and said, oh, well, we don't want that, so by their legislative authority, we can do this. But keep in mind that the 2018 referendum has nothing to do, and the 2021 referendum are bookends of the vested rights.
So how do you feel like that plays into the current circumstance? What was your question there?
So the point to be made here, and it's easy to draw this conclusion, is that if 80% of Tooele County was against third-acre lots, doesn't it stand to reason that they would also be against even higher density?
You can't use that reasoning because the next referendum failed to get 16%. The very referendum on Oker Point.
The referendum rules were changed, and
Yeah.
the
Had to give it different-
signatures were
different
higher.
signature change.
Here's what I would say to that, Jess. We're not a socialist economy. We're not a socialist state. To let
So why
everyone,
develop it like it?
let everyone vote on everyone's property rights is pure democracy. And the whole representative government is built to protect rights. Okay, I mean, it's the whole basis against it. If we allow communities to control trade and stuff by the vote of the general public, that's pure democracy, and it takes away rights, because it's easy to know, there would not, if the county got together today, we would vote, not a single house would be built in Tooele County.
You probably,
I would acknowledge that. So that's the reason, that's the whole reason you don't. That's why we have representative government.
Except for Tooele County did get together on Oak Point and chose not to referendum. Well, I'm sorry, chose not to sign enough signatures that it would go to a vote. They did referendum, but Tooele County as a whole, entire county, got together and says, we have no desire to have this go to a vote of the county.
Because then it became the city of Erda, it had nothing to do with the county. So the county didn't care.
Easy to not get signatures during COVID and Christmas, right?
So here's what I would say. Here's what I would say. We can agree in this meeting, I think, at this table, can agree that the density and the units and the residential plan is best.
I'd have to, I'm just throwing that out as discussion.
Well, I mean, I think
Okay.
I'm using
For-
Jordan's
for-
words just.
For purposes of discussion, let's,
Throw me under the bus.
No, you're the last one. We can all get run over by a bus, but you.
From what I've heard from Gerald and even from our own attorney,
no, okay, go ahead. No, stop. Okay, go ahead.
I think we agree, the majority, at least at this table, can agree that there's vested rights. And with those vested rights comes the approval of a plan in density, in units, in acreage. And one of the things that the ordinance actually makes you have so the planned community zone, chapter 31, it requires you to have a development agreement. So development agreement's a requirement of the approved plan, of the approved zone. So what we're here to say is, all right, Erda City, under those premonitions or those pretenses, what is it that you want to see? Where can we go from here?
And just to add to that, a couple of thoughts. One, that was a good point that hasn't been discussed yet, and that is, and I don't know if that will change your thinking, because it's a new concept to me. I helped prepare this MDA, and I hadn't remembered that the MDA is actually a requirement of the zone. It's not a unique, even though LUDMA allows development agreements as land control or land use decisions, this zone specifically says if you're going to do a PC zone and you have the requisite number of acres and you master plan it, you have to have a development agreement. That's the first thought. But if we take what Joe said, and I think there's a general, and I'm not trying to take away John Brem's very appropriate saying, we're just having a discussion here. But if we work on the basic assumption that the density and the pods, that the plan is vested, then I would invite the city council to do this, to go through this agreement and say, what parts of this are contractual? And if you do that, I think you'll find that almost all of those aspects run squarely in the city's favor. It's the dedication of open space. It's the assumption of the obligations with regards to the road in 5.7.1 that we talked about. It's the contribution of over $1 million to the city budget. So as you look through it, if we're going to take this approach and try to skin this in a way where we say there might be some vested rights and some contractual rights, and that's an okay way to look at it. I personally think it's all vested, but I can see the merit of the other side that says there might be some vesting in density and there might be some contractual rights. But even if you take that position and you look at the agreement, you have to say, okay, if we were to separate the agreement between the vesting and the contractual and throw the contractual away, is the city in a better position? And my biased opinion, when I try to look at it objectively, I say the city's not in a better position by getting rid of the contractual obligations, because they all run in favor of the city. And there are obligations that have been placed on the developer for the public benefit. And so, anyway, I'd encourage you to read it. And look at it that way and say, which of these contractual provisions do we not want?
But by your
So-
own admission, you've already modified that agreement with the county.
No,
County one's the old one.
we haven't modified, we assumed obligations from the county.
The county, so,
That was in
as
the
I,
original agreement.
Terry, as I understood your concern, there's an agreement that has nothing to do with anybody at this table, okay? There's an agreement that was adopted in 2010 by the county, where the county and the developer on a different project agreed to split the cost of some future road improvements. And the developer did their half, and the county there hadn't yet been the need for the county to do its half. When these developers came in and negotiated this master development agreement, they took all the remaining obligations with respect to that road and said, county, you don't need to worry about that. We'll assume all those obligations. And so my understanding of the law is that now when that land gets incorporated into the city's the beneficiary of that agreement between the county and the developer. And the city gets the benefit now of having the developer take on the obligation that originally was the county's obligation.
And that's outlined in the new agreement that you entered
That's
into with the county.
5.7.1.
And 5.7.2.
Yeah, those are two,
There's two parts, there's the intersection of the road.
those two subsections are two obligations that the government, whichever the applicable government was at the time, had, that the developer expressly assumed in this development agreement.
So they had those obligations under a 2010 agreement and they had yet to perform on them. And under your new agreement, you took on those obligations.
That's correct.
Interesting, okay.
So the same area
Yes.
10 years ago.
Yeah, so the county had agreed, in essence, and this is a real simplification, but the county said, okay, we're gonna need a full road. We'll let you go forward with your development developer in 2010, which is not us, if you'll build half of it, essentially. And then when the traffic demands merit up, we'll come in and do our other half. That obligation to do the other half has still just been lingering out there. That's what these developers assumed, is the obligation to do the other half.
When I don't know, it even, the contemplation, we're looking at our view of this and how we want it to read. But that decision was made because there was supposed to be an east-west corridor from Drew Bay Road all the way to Grantsville's 112. And they called it the Parkway, and it goes west of the SR 36 all the way on the old railroad right-of-way to create traffic flow, and that would help facilitate traffic getting to Mid-Valley Highway and all the other parts of the county. So when you look at it from that perspective, you go, all right, this is a planning tool. Sure, we'll build half this road, the developer will build half this road, we'll get the intersection done, and we'll facilitate the county moving the parkway that way. So we're going, all right, 2010 is a long time ago, right? So we took that on from the county, and we still have to build the developer's other half. So that full road gets built there that was contemplated 10 years ago.
So in response, we're starting to chase down what we would agree to, and I think that's probably inappropriate for this level of discussion. Because you know what we want, and you know what we want, and maybe we just end of the day, you just say, this is what we want, we'll vote it up and down, see what happens. But I think that's probably more discussion. I think it makes a lot of sense to go with Jordan with a mediation. And I haven't talked to my counsel yet. And go through that approach. Because I'm still somewhat convinced, I believe that some of these things you're vested in and some of them you're not. And what they are,
I guess the part that I struggle with is do you you really wanna walk away from those ones you're questioning?
Well, I think to back up, just tell us what you think we're best at it and let's start there. And then we'll go, I agree to mediation with.
Wait, let's go to mediation and talk about it.
Well, but I'm not sure.
I don't think I can agree to that.
This is a forum where, why not? Is mediation binding, Jordan?
No?
I think he's saying that maybe mediation and with the representative, rather than trying to do this in a public meeting, there may be some advantages to having more of a formal mediation. Is that
Yeah,
what-
yeah.
I'm fine with that. Here's my concern is the time frame. If an estoppel certificate, we have till, I mean, this is the 14th day?
A week,
A week from Thursday.
6 days, what's
No,
today's
it's
date?
further. Anyway, there's an estoppel certificate due in 20 days. And we can, there's always an allowance for an extension, right? So we can do it, but I don't know that I want it to take 3 months, to be honest with
It
you.
don't take 3 months if we make it take 3 months.
So here's the concern, in the last 30 days, residential mortgage rates have gone up by over 2% on a 30-year mortgage. That hasn't affected home prices yet because there's been such a demand, a pent-up demand. But normally to double mortgage rates is absolutely going to affect demand. And so we have the benefit of this really good market. And if this drags on, and we don't get the estoppel certificate or the acknowledgement from the city that there's some vesting here, whatever that vesting is. It could dramatically affect the value of this property. It could create tens of millions of dollars of damage to the developer.
So we're right back to where we talked earlier.
Put another way, right now is a fantastic time to move forward with this development agreement. Later this summer might not be. And there could be tens of millions of dollars in value swing between now and then. And that's why the request for the estoppel came in on the 1st. We're hoping to get something by the 20th. If we were to extend that, we'd want it to be a very short extension, because now's the time of year to get this acknowledged and get this property marketed and get those further applications in and get moving on things. And we can't miss that window.
So you're hinting at a lawsuit if we don't act quick enough?
No, and I don't want to turn up the temperature, but what I'm saying is that the practicality of it is that there will be significant damages. So I absolutely don't want to turn up the temperature of what I think has been a really productive discussion. But I just want to let the city council know that this isn't just a theoretical discussion. This is a discussion with tens of millions of dollars of potential damages if this is unduly delayed. That's all I'm saying.
So I guess maybe the question is, when would you be available to do a mediation, Jordan? What's your schedule look
Yeah,
like?
so I'm looking, tomorrow or Friday looks pretty good for me. And then next week I could do, Monday or Tuesday.
If we can put it into that kind of time frame, can we get a week or 2 week extension on this estoppel certificate?
Jordan, what days did you say you had tomorrow?
Yeah, I could do tomorrow or Friday, or Monday or Tuesday. I'm not available Wednesday through Friday next week, and then the following week.
So between here to next Tuesday.
And basically, I think Joe and I have tomorrow, and then we're both out for different things until Monday the 28th. So it's either tomorrow or sometime during the week of the 28th. I would prefer to do it tomorrow.
Do you feel comfortable doing an extension until April 1, April 10?
When's your next city council meeting?
Tomorrow.
But it's not on the agenda.
Yeah, it's not on the agenda. When's your next one after that?
Thursday?
Every Thursday.
Thursday.
So why don't
We
do
will
it?
not be meeting
On
on the
31st.
31st.
The next question is, what's your schedule look like, John?
Well, I could do Tuesday, of next week.
You guys are out of.
So I'm out next week, but I could do Tuesday. The 29th isn't so great, but how about like the 30th? If the 17th doesn't work.
Oh,
Would that work for you, Jordan? 30th would work for me.
sorry, 30th of March?
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Tomorrow's out for you.
I'll miss a birthday party at work, but I think I can.
Is it your birthday?
No, it's not my birthday.
We
Yes,
surely
I
don't
am-
want to do that.
I am, I am
We'll bring
over the
cake.
30th, for sure.
What time do they get done? John? What time do you guys
What
think?
time on the 30th?
I'll tell you, my experience has been Jordan has the tightest schedule of about anybody I know, so do you have a time that's better
Sorry, what would be besides?
for the 30th? What time?
No, I can do any time on the 30th. I mean, if we wanna start at 9 AM.
Let's do it. 9 AM it is?
And what, can you put oh, you don't have a meeting the next night anyway, right?
No, we don't.
April 7th will be the next one.
Yeah.
We're contemplating more than 2 people being at this mediation, correct?
You need more.
I think the city is just gonna have 2.
The intent here is that you couldn't have a quorum so that we could split out and have the hard conversations and really hash out a proposal that you can then bring to an open meeting and propose and then decide on in the open meeting, right?
But since it's this type of thing, can they have a quorum?
No, they couldn't have a quorum.
They could, but it would.
Well,
require
then
it
we,
to be a public
yeah.
meeting.
then it would be a vote.
So I'm assuming Jess and Craig
I think it's these guys' call.
representing.
So what's wrong with the public meeting?
I have no problems with it.
That's what I think this should be in the public.
I think that's fine. My experience is
Be just like today,
there's some
just,
second guessing that to get an agreement, there's some give and take and if you have to explain every single give, it's just, it's sometimes better to say, in good faith, a bunch of people got together and this is what we worked out. But there's nothing illegal or improper about doing it. It's just my experience would tell you that the practicality of it is we're more likely to be successful in a more traditional mediation. But Jordan has 1,000 times more experience than I do.
Yeah, I mean, typically in these meetings, what's happens is we don't want to say things that we don't want to say. Where when you're in mediation, again, the intent is not to do anything behind closed doors, because you're gonna make your decision in an open meeting and you're gonna lay it all out. But as far as the discussions go of, okay, what are we willing to give? What are we willing to take? You know, sometimes there's more willingness to have those conversations, frankly, when you're not with each other. But when you're in separate rooms with me and we're talking about, okay, what are you willing to give here? What are you willing to take here? I can have that conversation with you guys and I can have that conversation with them. And both sides are more willing to talk about that stuff. Again, the intent not being to do it, to make decisions behind closed doors, but just to work through the hard questions without anyone looking over their shoulder worrying that they're gonna say something that's gonna come back to bite them.
Jordan, are you willing to say something, speak to the confidentiality of mediation?
Yeah, so with mediation, when we are to mediation, and again, we could do that in an open meeting, but most people aren't gonna be willing to say the things that need to be said. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so with the mediation, yeah, it's subject to a mediation privilege against disclosure, meaning that any mediation communications you have, negotiations, can't be used in court to say, well, he said that he would do this, and she said she would do that, and now they're going back on it. So the idea is, in mediation, you can have open and free conversation about the hard issues without anyone worrying about that they're gonna be painted into a corner. So that's the practical benefit of it. Again, it's no intent to hide anything, it's just, sometimes it's an easier place to have the conversations, so.
So John, would you prefer just 1 or 2 councilmen beside yourself? 2.
That way 2 people can hear it and hear different things.
If you have 3, yeah, then you have 3 people here different things.
So see no evil, hear no evil.
That's what I would think.
we can decide who goes there. I've been in this again and again with these conversations, and we are the planning and zoning committee. But if someone else really felt strongly and wanted to step in. We can talk about it.
You can talk about it tomorrow's meeting, or you can talk about it now.
Alternative at 9, did we pick a location?
Oh, 9? Birthday parties at 9?
I was joking. 9 AM on the 30th, yeah, I'm good to go.
In your office, right?
If you want to do our office, we're in Salt Lake downtown, so you'd have to find a parking spot. But I'm happy to come out here as well, whatever you guys want to do.
Toss up.
The problem would be getting 2 rooms here.
You need 2 rooms?
You don't think closing the accordion would work?
That's a good idea.
Unless somebody has their ear on it.
We'd probably want a little more separation, unless these are really soundproof accordions.
I think there's another office here.
I'm sure we could arrange for another.
I would be.
There's actually, in that office, there's a council room.
I mean, we're fine with it, but I would be surprised if we can't get 2 rooms in this building.
Yeah.
But
I'm fine going to your office.
Another room right down the hall.
Let's do it here then.
We'll hang out at McDonald's and you guys be here.
Text us. Is their lobby open?
So in this building?
Yes.
Jess, will the city take the responsibility to find the 2 rooms with the county, or?
Yes.
Thank you for your efforts in arranging this meeting. I'm very grateful. I give this speech, and I really mean it, but when I go to basements of county buildings and city buildings, and I see citizens that are concerned, that are here, and people that are willing to sacrifice, I really believe this is what makes America great. And it's mostly people like you that are willing to run for office and take the heat and do good for the community, and we're all better off because there are people doing it. And so thank you for your service and your sacrifice. And even though I'm not from this community, I'm benefited by it. So thank you for your service.
And I hope you see our side too, that this was all done by the county, and the biggest angst for the residents of Erda was we had no input, and yet it's gonna have the biggest impact on the city. And so that was the main thing everybody was saying, we had no choice in this, it was dumped in our lap, we have to take it, blah, blah, blah. And they all says, well, why wouldn't it be the city of Erda to decide what's built and done in the city of Erda, handed over from the county? So that's,
You've helped me better see that perspective today. Thank you for sharing that. I can see where that'd be frustrating. Okay.
Entertain, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded, we adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Red button.
I'm sorry to say.
Don't do it, just don't do it. Don't do it. Probably for the best.
Just didn't want to come back and say what the says.
I don't know whether people are trying to get in.
no.
Because he's on the ranch.
That's the problem, is how it's, actually, I used to work on this.
So I don't.
And all the hay fields, I used to haul hay, and it's now subdivision.
Stand it anymore, huh, Clyde? Can't stand it anymore, you gonna fix that?